Good morning again, friends. Well, we come to the final part of our teaching series in Hosea, and today we're in chapter 14. And really this is the concluding chapter, if you like, to the whole narrative. And what we find is actually that chapter 14 comes to us in three parts. The first section is the prophet Hosea speaking to Israel to return. And we find that reminder, if you like, from verses 1 to 3, to stop their wayward ways and to return back to their covenantal relationship and to actually come to Yahweh and say, forgive us, forgive us. Not simply to come with sacrifices, but actually we find come and offer the fruit of their lips. This is a declaration requesting forgiveness. The second part of chapter 14 is then a reminder from Yahweh himself of his compassionate heart towards those that do come to him. And he speaks of his love for his people and also his preparedness to forgive, to redeem, and to restore. And then finally, from verse 9, if the second part was verses sort of 4 to 8, finally in verse 9, we've just sort of got this single verse touched on to the end. It's a little bit like a proverb, if you like, and some people think that maybe the editor of Hosea, the person who compiled these writings and sayings and stories, might have been one of the same people who put together some of the proverbs, because we're told right at the end, who is wise, let them realize these things. Who is discerning, let them understand. The ways of the Lord are right, and righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. And so we're sort of given this final sentence as an overarching, capture of what does it mean to walk in the ways of the Lord? What does it mean to seek out true wisdom? What does it mean to turn from the lies and from the false wisdom that is of this world that we so often focus on, and actually turn to what is true and right and walk in the ways of the Lord? It may sound like a proverb, but you and I both know that this is what Hosea has been about right through the 14 chapters. What does it mean to be faithful to the covenant? What does it mean to walk in truth and not deceive ourselves by lies? For that is the message of Hosea. Do not be deceived by the things of this world, whether it is the false gods, the deities that others might uphold, whether it is finding our sense of security in the political powers, the nations, whether it's Assyria or Egypt, or even for us right now. Whether it is being deceived by actually the work of our hands, like we're reminded in chapter 14 here, of this image of the Israelites crafting items of beauty and then displaying them, elevating them as false gods. Think of the golden calf as Moses comes down from the mountaintop, and yet falsely proclaiming that these creations, although beautiful, are God themselves, or a God, and worshipping them. And the message of Hosea is, do not be deceived, do not follow these lies. Do not think that either deities of other nations is going to save you. Do not think that other nations themselves is going to save you. Do not think that the creations of your own hands are going to save you. No, you will simply stumble, enslave yourselves, and find yourselves, as Hosea 14 points out, as orphans without a father. And yet, if you turn back to Yahweh, if we turn back to Him, we find a compassionate Father to those that might have once been orphans. It makes me think today about how often we too are in exactly the same boat as the people of Israel, so often turning to the idols of our day. On Sunday, I briefly mentioned some of the idols that I think pervade our culture today. And they're connected, I guess, to maybe some of the idols of Israel, but I think they are a little bit more nuanced, particularly within our Western culture. I'd just like to briefly mention them again. The first one was comfort, that we idolize that place of comfort and being comfortable. You just have to look at how much money, how much time, how much of our attention is diverted in creating a comfortable lives for ourselves where we have no stress, where even our productivity might go down. And yet the number one aspiration is to be comfortable. The second one that I think is a real struggle for our culture is control. This is probably part of human nature, I guess. But we want and we desire and we idolize being in control, being the master of our destiny, creating our own future and not allowing others to speak into that at times. We wish to be in control of ourselves, but also we wish to be in control of others around us as well. The idol of control, I think, is a real great challenge for us within a Western culture. The third one that I want to bring to our attention is a bit of a nuanced one, I guess. But I think in our culture, in our day, this is something that we have to wrestle with. And that is the idol that is family. We have sort of come from that almost American dream of family, house, 2 kids, white picket fence and such. And I think we're starting to realize that this idea of a nuclear family providing our security, providing our identity, is actually idolatry at times. And that ought not to be our greatest aspiration, nor should it be where we find who we are. Because when we start to find our identity in those places, we realize that actually we are elevating something that is good, something that is intended for good, and making it something that is great, putting it into God's place. And I think we do that all too often when it comes to family. The fourth idol that I want to briefly speak to is that of approval. This is a real powerful one for our people today, I think. That the elevation where we find our identity, find who we are, find our sense of security in the relationships, the earthly relationships around us, and in the approval of others. How often do we do that? Whether it's in our family relationships, and it's not just the elevation of family, but it's finding the approval and finding our security in the approval of a husband or of a wife or of children or of a father or a mother or grandparents, or maybe it's even in work relationships as well, and finding our ultimate approval in those relationships. And there's good things within that. But when we do that at the expense of finding our approval and our value and our worth in our relationship with our Father in heaven, well, then that becomes idolatry. And approval is something that we have to wrestle with in our culture today. The final idol that I want to draw our attention to this morning is that of power. And it's linked to control, but it's a little bit more nuanced. You see, power is about winning and being successful at all costs. I think this is a really challenging one for many people in our culture today, where we're told that in order to succeed, in order to be of worth and of value, we need to climb to the top of the ladder. We need to hold power. And we find actually that the message of the gospel is vastly different to that. You see, in the gospel, we find that it comes from giving up power, from taking the place of a servant, if you like, where true success and true value is found. And we find so often the gospel is counter-cultural to our own beliefs, our value systems. And certainly it pushes against so many of these idols of our culture. Well, friends, just as you hear this, I'd love for you to take some time out today, not only to reread Hosea chapter 14, or maybe even some other parts of Hosea that you've been working your way through over the last 4 weeks as we've explored this text, but as you do that, to ask yourself the question, what are the idols of your own life? What are the good things that you have elevated to a certain status and made them great things, put them in place of God? What are the things on this earth where you find your own value, your own worth, your own security in them, rather than finding them in your relationship with the creator of the universe and the creator of your own life? And my friends, I'd encourage you, as you wrestle with this, as you discover afresh the idols of your own heart, take encouragement from Hosea in knowing that the God that we worship is a God who loves to forgive, a God who desires for his people to come to him, declaring their repentance, and knowing then that God will declare his forgiveness over our lives, will be redeeming us and creating within us a new heart, a heart that is faithful to him, but a heart that seeks and desires the truth, and seeks and desires to walk in that truth. Have a great week, my friends. Thanks.